Hello, you lovely lots, and welcome back to a brand new stagey review here on my theatre YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Flora, and I like to talk about the theatre a lot. I don't typically like to call myself a theatre critic or anything like that. I like to simply put it as me being a theatre opinion haver, and I like sharing those opinions with you, and trust me, I have a lot of opinions. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2025 UK and Ireland tour of Dear Evan Hansen, which I was kindly invited to go and check out by the lovely folks over at TikTok, EMG and the New Wimbledon Theatre. I haven't seen this show since before COVID, so a long time ago it feels like, and given that this is a brand new non-replica production, and the fact that I have changed so much, I wondered whether my thoughts and feelings about Dear Evan Hansen as a show had changed. Before we get too far into the video, I'm going to give you a little breakdown as to the background of the show, as well as a brief synopsis, just so some of the points I talk about later in the video make a little bit more sense, and we can all be on the same page, giving some of my thoughts and feelings a bit more context. So we're going to start with the production history. This musical opened on Broadway at the Music Box Theatre in December of 2016. However, it had its official world premiere at the Arena Stage in Washington, DC in July of 2015. There was also a short off-Broadway run in the March of 2016, I believe. The show ran on Broadway for 1,627 shows, not including previews, and closed on the 18th of September 2022. The show also ran in the West End for 3 years, though technically not 3 full years because of the whole COVID mess, opening on the 29th of October 2019, running through until it closed on the 27th of October 2022. Other notable productions include a US tour, a production in Canada, Finland, and even South Korea. There is also the movie, but it was so bad I couldn't finish it, so that I'm not going to talk about it any more than that. And then you have the current UK tour, which, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but the UK tour that's running at the minute is the first official non-replica production of the show, meaning it's the first professional production of Dear Evan Hansen that looks visually distinct from those that came before it. Story-wise, I think the best synopsis of Dear Evan Hansen that I can give you is that it is a show about Evan, a young man who has severe social anxiety, who desperately wants to make a connection with his peers. He's so keen to form this connection, in fact, that when the opportunity presents itself, he fabricates a relationship with a deceased student in order to get closer to his family, which also happens to be the family of the girl Zoe he has a crush on. Of course, the story of the show is much more complex than that, with a host of supporting characters, all of which have their own motives and desires when it comes to meddling in Evan's spiral of lies, all of which take the death of this student Connor and twist it and turn it and use it to basically benefit themselves until the lie becomes so big that it basically implodes all over Evan. Obviously, I feel like I could explain it in a lot more detail, but to do that, I'd have to go plot point by plot point, and I do really think you guys should check the show out yourself, so I'm not going to explain any more than that, just to kind of avoid mega spoilers, shall we say. And moving on from the synopsis, now that you know a little bit about what the show is about, I also thought I'd share with you guys my connection with the show as to whether I've seen it before, what I knew about it going in, this, that, and the other. Now, I did hint at it earlier, but I was lucky enough to see Dear Evan Hansen in the West End when it was at the Noel Coward Theatre back in 2019. Now, unfortunately, I never saw Sam Tutty's performance as Evan, but I did, in fact, go and see Marcus, alternate Evan, on his very first performance, which made it even more special. And as you can see, yes, I stage doored, and it was brilliant. I really enjoyed the show at the time, but I feel like the amount of tears rolling down my face really suggested otherwise. When I say I genuinely cried from You Will Be Found straight through the interval all the way to the end of the show, I was sobbing. I remember the show being a really big deal for like all the theatre kids at my school. There was one girl whose grandparents had gone to New York and she'd begged them to buy her Dear Evan Hansen merch whilst they were out there. It was like the one new modern show that everyone was like, oh my god, we have to go and see this. But it wasn't a show that I feel like I felt very strongly about prior to seeing it. It was one of those that I ended up going to see because my brother really wanted to go and see it. And I think this is because, and I'll admit this here and now, back in 2019, as hard as it might be for you guys to believe, I was not a theatre kid, okay? I went and saw shows when my family went to see them. I was very lucky enough to see quite a bit of theatre as a kid, but I wasn't a diehard theatre fan in the way I feel like I have become as I've shared my love for certain shows and theatre more prolifically on the internet over the last couple years. So yeah, it wasn't really a show I was fussed about prior to going and seeing it, but after seeing it, it was definitely music, certainly, that I really liked listening to, with a lot of the songs still being on my musical theatre playlist to this day. Now, like I said as well earlier, this new UK tour is a non-replica production, so whilst I have seen a production of Dear Evan Hansen in the past, I had not seen the touring production prior to going and seeing it at the New Wimbledon Theatre. So I knew the story, I knew the music, but I didn't know what this show would look like visually compared to the West End. So how did changing the visuals of the show impact how I felt about it overall? As usual, I'm going to be kicking things off with the highlights, basically the what I liked about the show, if you will. Kicking this off, I have to say the music for me was and always will be, I think, the best part of Dear Evan Hansen. To me, it's the show's strongest asset relative to everything else, hence why I'm naming it as my first highlight. Pasek and Paul have created a truly beautiful score for this musical, with many of the songs rightly earning their place as modern musical theatre classics. In fact, I think the only song in the show for me that isn't a hit is To Break in a Glove, and for a show to have only one song out of 14 not be an absolute hit is very rare, so I do think Dear Evan Hansen needs applauding for that. Whilst it isn't a musical theatre album that I maybe listen to as much as others in my free time, songs like You Will Be Found, Sincerely Me, and Waving Through a Window are wonderfully composed and stand strongly on their own outside of the context of the show, which to me is another good testament of how good of songs they are. The cast vocals, particularly Ryan Coppell's Evan, also added to these songs, bringing them to life so beautifully in this new production. The next highlight of this new production of Dear Evan Hansen for me is going to be the staging. Starting with the stage design itself, Morgan Large has beautifully used lights, mirrors, and LED screens in a way that really beautifully draws the audience into the story and makes the world feel much larger than just the four walls of the stage. There is also, I noticed, a lot more set to play with as opposed to, say, the West End production had. For example, the Murphys had more of a full kitchen set, Evan's bedroom set was slightly larger, and even the school scenes had these really fun lockers that opened up to have LEDs inside, which I really like. Whilst the more minimalist approach to previous Hansen productions was one I always really liked, I think having a little bit more set for the cast to play with as well as the audience to kind of visualize was a really nice change as well. The show also had this partition that was kind of made of frosted glass that was used to divide the set up in many ways throughout the show. We could have a separated upstage and downstage, or multiple scenes being represented at the same time just by dividing the space up with these glass partitions, which I thought was really neat. It also often split Evan off from the rest of the people on stage, which was to me a really nice visual representation of how a character like Evan is feeling in the moment, very separated physically and mentally from those around him. Though I will say, I do wish someone had maybe come along with a bit of window cleaner and wiped them down, because even from up in the dress circle, all I could see when the lights hit them at the wrong angle were these like grubby fingerprints all over it, which was entertaining. And did it detract from the show overall? No, it's just maybe something to consider moving forward. This production also shifts away from the simple blue color palette that previous productions have used, and instead makes it more colorful and vibrant, making it feel youthful and fresh without going too over the top. I think the decision to go with a more colorful palette for this new production definitely gave it a much needed zhuzh and refreshed it and revived it in a way that I feel like younger audiences might be able to connect with more. It was a youthful refresh that I think the show needed. I mean, just look at the difference between these two programs. I think you can pretty clearly see that this one here is a very blue dominated color palette, whilst this one is a lot more colorful, and this is a pretty good way of sort of, I guess, visually showing you guys the differences between the productions without us all going on a field trip and watching them together. And then moving on from the staging, but I guess still kind of related to the staging, is that the biggest highlight of this production of Dear Evan Hansen for me was the fact it was a non-replica production. I think the new creative direction that they took the show in really worked. It helped breathe this new life into Dear Evan Hansen as a story and as a show to revitalize it for new fans. From the brightened color palettes to the advancements in technology being used on stage, it was fun to see a book and score that I knew so well and has such a strong visual identity attached to it, represented in a completely new way. One of the biggest standouts to me, I think, amongst this, aside from the changes to the color palette and the changes to the set, was the change to the choreography for Sincerely Me. And this was actually a change that I shockingly preferred to the original. Now, the Sincerely Me choreography from the original productions of Dear Evan Hansen is iconic, but I loved this new choreography that they chose to incorporate in the song in this show. The new choreography alone in this scene, I think, made it feel more like we were watching teenagers from now as opposed to teenagers from 10 years ago on the stage, which was really nice. This show took moments I loved from the original production and reimagined them in a way that still felt purposeful, but at the same time enhanced each of the scenes, which I think is a really fine balance to do. Like I said, particularly because Dear Evan Hansen and, you know, its blue color palette and its polo shirt and its cast are all so strongly tied to the identity of the show. And to reimagine it so successfully successfully, I think is a testament to the creatives that worked on this show, because I imagine it's a very hard thing to do. The changes didn't feel like they were being done just to kind of like be quirky and different in a like, I'm not like other Dear Evan Hansen productions kind of way, you know? I was really worried going into it that it being a non-replica production, it would make decisions to be different for the sake of being different, and I'm glad it didn't. Everything felt like it was done for a reason. It was deliberate and thought through and served to enhance the production and the story it was telling, as opposed to, yeah, just being different and quirky. I also think modernizing it somewhat with the technology referenced in the show, as well as used throughout the show, kept it in line with audiences' understandings of the lives of teenagers in 2025. Whereas I feel like if we did a replica production of it right now, we would start to feel a little bit disconnected from the teenagers we were seeing on the stage, with it being a bit more of like a period piece for 2015, as dumb as that sounds. And ultimately for me, this reimagined non-replica production to me proves that whilst replica productions definitely have their place, non-replica productions can breathe new life into a show and revitalize it for a new generation of theatre fans, whilst not entirely alienating those that love the productions that have come before. I hope that rambling makes sense. But those are my highlights out of the way for you guys. But now it's time to go over to my lowlights, which, as you could probably guess, is the stuff that I maybe didn't love as much. And the first lowlight for me is definitely going to be the ensemble. That's right, this production of Dear Evan Hansen has an ensemble. If you didn't know, the original production of Dear Evan Hansen only has 8 cast members, with all of the covers for the roles being offstage covers, meaning they're not on the stage when they're not performing in the role they're covering for. The UK touring production, however, has 6 additional cast members making up the ensemble. Every member of the ensemble, including Sunny Monaghan, who was cast after the hashtag You Will Be Found campaign that this production ran on TikTok, they were all incredibly talented. So this low light isn't me saying that they were all rubbish. In fact, adding 6 extra voices to moments like You Will Be Found was beautiful. I just feel like they were severely underused. Most of the time, it kind of just felt like they were little more than stagehands wearing costumes, as they'd pop on and off to move set about, but not really do anything. Or they'd add a little bit of dance here and there to a show that has never really had dance incorporated into it. I completely understand the decision to add an ensemble. To tour a show like this, of course, you need covers to come with you in case of cast illness. To maintain the show, they're a necessity. And you don't really want to be dragging around your alternate Evan Hansen, your alternate Zoe, etc., and not have them performing. By adding the ensemble, everyone gets stage time. However, there were so many long stretches of the show where they didn't come on and they didn't perform, and they were literally just like shifting a sofa on and off the stage, that they felt unneeded until there was a piece of set that needed moving. A good summary, I guess, is that they felt entirely underutilized, but also very forced in at the same time. A weird balance, I know. Even if I did really enjoy the added richness it added to the vocals of big numbers like You Will Be Found. Moving on from the ensemble, yet still related, I want to talk about the added choreography. Now, Dear Evan Hansen has never been a show up until now that has had a lot of choreography in it outside of the outside of the Sincerely Me choreography, as well as like some very purposeful walking. When I found out they were adding more movement and dance to this production, I was definitely curious, but I'm really sad to say it just did not work for me. Now, I did say earlier that I loved the new Sincerely Me choreography, and I stand by that, but the moments where the ensemble came on and danced for me were nothing more than distracting. A lot of the choreography in Waving Through a Window, for example, was quite literally upstaging Ryan as he was singing his heart out, because Evan was downstage and all of the dancing was happening upstage, and it felt very split on where you were supposed to be looking. I think moments like this could have worked a lot better if the dancing felt so much less separated from our main characters in the show. And I think the separation occurred because none of our main characters ever partook in the dancing, if that makes sense. Like, imagine Newsies, where Jack, Davy, Les, Catherine, and Crutchy never danced, and everyone just kind of danced around them whilst they stood there singing. That's kind of how this felt to me. It was just so disconnected or distracting in some areas, and I don't think it really enhanced the show in the way it maybe was intended for. And so for me personally, it just didn't work as a valuable addition. And then my final lowlight for Dear Evan Hansen is going to be the story. Now, bear with me, I think this might take a little while to get through, but I'm going to do my best to explain exactly what I mean. And you might think, why am I reviewing the story when the story of the non-replica production hasn't actually changed? You're right, it is exactly the same as previous productions. The book of the show has not changed at all. But I wanted to talk about the fact that I still personally feel like, even with the reimagined visuals, the story of Dear Evan Hansen isn't one that necessarily really works for me. I'm always slightly unsure how to articulate this, but like I said, I'm going to do my best. so just bear with me. For a story with mental health so rooted at its core, I think the show could do far more to address the mental health of its characters, as opposed to kind of dancing around the matter and using it as an excuse or as a motive for their behaviors throughout the show. It feels kind of surface level as a result of that, almost gimmicky. It's kind of giving peak 2015 mental health just became a buzzword vibes, if you know what I mean. Because whilst I do think flawed characters can be brilliant, it feels to me like mental health is used as an excuse for this exploitative and otherwise unjustifiable behavior a lot of the characters have. When we have shows like Next to Normal or even Assassins to some extent that have significant themes of mental health, both of which handle them very differently, but I think more tactfully, I think Dear Evan Hansen's handling of the topic just feels a touch half-assed. It just feels like we're supposed to sympathize with the characters of Dear Evan Hansen because they have mental health and for no other reason. These characters have very little personality beyond what their mental health is making them do. Their mental health just feels so surface level and like this built-in excuse for everyone's actions, as opposed to the show taking the time to really explore these complex characters that it's built. Because why take the time to delve into their mental health when you could just have them sing another brilliant song? I think this is particularly noticeable when you look at characters like Alana, who, let's be real, uses Connor's death as an excuse to gain social clout. And when Evan calls her out for doing this, she's like, yeah, well, I know what it's like to be invisible like Connor too. Like, girl, really? And this is how a lot of the show comes across to me. Character is in bad mental state, then character does something dodgy and realizes that it helps their mental state. It makes them feel a little bit better, at least in the short term. And then when another character points out to our original character that what they're doing is wrong, the character just goes, oh, well, I have bad mental health and this is actually helping me deal with my bad mental health, so it can't be bad. Nor do I think I'm wrong. Sorry, not sorry. It's just a bit icky. I know topics of mental health and discussions around things like anxiety and depression are very, very complex and maybe not the kind of topic that a musical maybe wants to try and tackle across 7 different characters. But I don't think that's an excuse to use it as an excuse for your character's behaviors. Now, is this me massively oversimplifying the story and a complex topic? Absolutely. But I just can't quite get over the fact that the whole story just doesn't quite sit right with me. Not truly addressing Evan's mental health beyond his mum going, have you taken your anxiety pills today? Means that this vague mental health that all of the characters supposedly have just becomes this sort of scapegoat or justification for their actions throughout the story, which I just don't think is the right approach when dealing with what can be such a sensitive and meaningful matter for a lot of people. Evan isn't a great guy. None of the characters in the show are good. All the characters in the show are deeply flawed. And like I said, a flawed character can be great. I just don't think mental health is the same kind of character flaw as, say, something like pride or selfishness. Now, I will say this new production and Ryan Coppell's portrayal of Evan is far more comedic and awkward and anxious than previous iterations have been. I know I said the story hasn't changed, but through changes to direction as well as actor choice in portraying the role of Evan, I do think Evan's attitude and behavior has shifted away from maybe the more neurodivergent portrayal that has been seen with previous performers. Now, it's never been stated by any of the producers, writers, or anyone in any production that Evan is actually neurodivergent in some way, although I know a lot of fans theorize that he's autistic. The show instead, I think, maintains this idea that he's just lacks social skills because he's socially anxious. But I do think I preferred the way Ryan portrayed the character, making it feel less neurodivergent, because again, I think it kind of not infantilizes Evan in a way, but I think coding him as neurodivergent is a sort of fine balancing act that I haven't always found tasteful in other productions. And so stepping away from this neurodivergent coding of Evan, I think gives him more agency and more responsibility for his own actions, which I appreciated. All in all, I think somewhere in these complex characters, there is a great story trying to be told. I just don't think it has maybe been executed in the way that perhaps modern audiences would appreciate, with the music doing the majority of the heavy lifting for this show, and therefore I do think elements of the story have been allowed to slide. But I hope that rambling makes sense, as me not liking the story of Dear Evan Hansen is one that I've really struggled to articulate for the longest time. I just hope my rambling has helped explain it a little bit, even though I don't think I've done a very good job. But let me know in the comments. But if you take anything away from this review, it's that Dear Evan Hansen on its UK and Ireland tour is still a fantastic show. Its songs are gorgeous, and I think the show is worth going to see just for the music alone, even if the story isn't perhaps as strong as it could be. The cast are amazing, and I do think that the whole non-replica side of it has breathed new life into this show, really giving it the zhuzh that it so desperately needed. It, to me, I think satisfies old fans of the show whilst also bringing it forward and re-proposing it to new fans, I guess would be a good way of saying it. But I think that is just about all of my thoughts on the UK and Ireland tour of Dear Evan Hansen, no matter how rambly, disconnected and hard to follow they were. Once again, a big thank you to the New Wimbledon Theatre, TikTok and EMG for having me along to see this brilliant show, to review it for you guys. If you want the chance to see the show for yourself, it is currently booking through until July 2025, so you still have plenty of time to see if it's coming to a venue near you. If you've already seen the show, I would love to know what you guys think about it down in the comments below. If it's more chaotic and very opinionated stagey content that you are after, then I highly recommend you hit that subscribe button to stick around for future reviews. As always, my lovelies, remember to stay stagey, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!